Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We have a nice big crowd today, which is awesome. I'm sure you're all here to hear Max Wallenstein read Torah. Um, we are going to get started in just a moment. Just as a reminder, we're going to let these last two people in, and then we'll get started so I can give everybody the same announcement at the same time. It's lovely to see you all, those of you whose faces I can see. Shabbat Shalom to Joe and to Irv and to Barry and to Alan and to Tamar. And I'm sure Joanna is there, though I can't see her. And to the Blum family and to Rebecca Menace and to David Kaplan and Marlise and Tybal. And I don't know which Lauren this is, but Lauren and Joel and the Fieldsmeyers. Shabbat Shalom. We are going to get started in just a moment with Minha. Just as a reminder, because we are not in person and we are only on Zoom and or YouTube, we are going to do all the things we can do as if we were davening alone, though it's obviously lovely to daven to your faces. So I'm going to skip over a few of the things. I'll make mention as to which those things are, so you're not confused and following along. But we will begin with Ashrei, which is on page 214 or page 226 in the Slim Shalom or page 558 in the full volume Sim Shalom. Ashrei Ashrei Vetecha Od Yalu Chasela Ashrei Amshekach Alo Ashrei Amshadonai Elohav Tehillah LeDavid. Potech et Eitecha Masbih Lecho Charatzon Tzadikan Damachalech. Tehillah Adonai Yedaber Pi V'Yivarech Kol Basar Shem Kodesh Olam Va'ed V'Anachnu Nevarechia Me'Taved Olam Hallelujah U'Val Tzion Goel Hashem Hashem Yaakov Ne'eman Olam V'Ata Kadosh Yoshev Tehillat Yisrael V'Kara Ze Al Ze Ve'Amar Kadosh 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 Adonai Tzevaot Meloch La'Haaretz Kevodo Mekablim V'tiseini ruach v'shma korei korash kado baruch Adonai b'imkomo natatim recha v'shemot Adonai imach le'olam va'ed. Adonai tzvat iman imeskal Adonai kasel Adonai tzvat Ve'yiftechu v'chayodei shemecha ki lo azavta dorshecha Adonai Adonai chafetz leman tzidko yagdil Torah ve'yadir. So we're going to skip Chatzi Kaddish again because I don't have 9 other people in my room with me currently. And we are going to go straight to the Torah reading, which Max Wallenstein is going to be reading for us. It's always a pleasure to have a former student reading Torah. Even though I had nothing to do with how well I'm sure he will read, I am still a proud teacher that he will be reading for us. So Max is going to say the blessing for learning Torah since he is not going to be reading Torah with aliyot. So he'll first say that blessing. Max, this is as much for you as for everybody else. So he's going to first say the blessing, and then he's going to do the first aliyah, pause, second aliyah, pause, third aliyah. If you're in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, he's going to be beginning at the start of Parshat Bo on page 374. And if you're in any other Tanakh or Chumash, we're at the beginning of Parashat Bo. All right, Max, you can unmute and read for us.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Vayomer Adonai el Moshe bo el Pharaoh, ki ani hichbadeti el libo ve'le'ev avadav lema'an shiti atotai le'bikar bo u'lema'an תספר באזני בנך ובן בנך את אשר התעללתי ממצרים והתותותי אשר שמתי בם וידעתם כי אני אדוני. ויבוא משה ואהרון אל פרעה ויאמרו אליו כה אמר אדוני אלוהי העברים עד מתי מאנת ליהנות מפני שלח עמי ויעבדוני.
Second Aliyah, verse 4.
כי אם אתה לשלח את עמי הנני מביא מחר הרבה ויבגו לך וכיסד אין הארץ ולא יוכל לראות את הארץ ואכל את יתר הפליטה הנשאר לכם מן הברד ואכל כל העץ הצומח לכם מן השדה ומלאו בתיך ובתי כל עבדיך ובתי כל מצרים אשר לא ראו אבותיך ואבות אבותיך מיום היותם על האדמה עד היום הזה ויפן ויצא מעם פרעה.
Verse 7, the third Aliyah.
ויאמרו עבדי פרעה אליו עד מתי יהיה זה לנו למכה שלח את האנשים ויעבדו את אדוני אלוהיהם התרם תדע כי עבדה מצרים. וישב את משה ואת אהרון על פרעה ויאמר עליהם לכו עבדו את אדוני אלוהיכם מי ומי ההולכים. ויאמר משה בנערינו בזקנינו נלך בבנינו ובבנותינו בצאננו ובבקרינו נלך כי חג אדוני לנו. ויאמר עליהם יהי כן אדוני עמכם כאשר אשלח אתכם ואת אפכם ראו כי רעד נגד פניכם לא כן לכו נא הגברים ועבדו את אדוני כי עתה אתם מבקשים ויגרש אותם מאת פני פרעה.
Yasher koach, Max. Beautiful reading. We look forward to having you read for us again very soon. But thank you for doing it. I asked your dad if this was the anniversary of your bar mitzvah, and he said no. He's just practicing reading Torah, which is the best kind of reading Torah. So really glad that you did it. And we're going to continue now with the Whispered Amida, which can be found on page 223 or page 234 in the full volume Sim Shalom. Sorry, in the Slim Shalom, and in the full volume Sim Shalom on page 572. If you have not yet finished your Amida, please continue at your own pace. If you're able to do so, please rise for Aleinu, page 231, page 248, or page 598. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol l'tetela l'tzavar shishol l'sanikim l'tzavar ואנחנו קוראים משתחווים ומודים לפני מלך המלכים וקדוש ברוך הוא. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Tom, would you like to unmute and lead us in Kaddish?
Sure, thank you. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabba.
Amen.
Amen.
Yalma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael agala v'bizman kariv v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shmei rabba mevarach le'olam lomei almaya.
Yehei shmei rabba mevarach le'olam omei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'tadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei kudsha v'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata tamivran ve'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mramav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom again. I haven't said Shabbat Shalom to everyone, so if I didn't say Shabbat Shalom to you already, lovely to see your faces now. If you did not get the source sheet that I'm going to be using in the Shabbat bulletin, I'll read through the sources that I'm going to be using. You also can use your Chumash that you had out before, because we're going to be using most of, if not all of actually, the last Aliyah that Max just read for us. So Exodus chapter 10, verses 7 through 12. And then any of the commentaries that we go over, I'm happy to read aloud in case you don't have the text in front of you. I'm sorry that the document says Vayera on it. I was preparing it during Shabbat Vayera, but now we are in Parashat Bo. So this is from Parashat Bo, and we're going to be discussing it a bit. Sometimes I come to these teachings with, a real lesson I want us to take away from a piece of Torah that I looked at and found really intriguing. And sometimes I come because I want to share something that was interesting to me that either I never noticed before or that I think has deeper meaning to it than we might ascribe to it as we're going through the Parsha. So this is the latter case. I'm sure there will be a lesson that we will come up with at the end, but I'm not coming into this with what we would say like a chop at the end. I'm not coming into this with an idea of this is what you should take away. This is something that I, when reading through the Parsha, was very interested in the language and in kind of the dance that is done between Pharaoh, Moshe, and Aaron here. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts and curious to hear your teachings on this particular piece of our text. So again, we're going to start with chapter 10, verse 7, and we're going to look at verses 7 through 12. I'm going to read through them pretty straight. I might make a few comments in the middle, but I want us to read it through as a complete story, and then if you have thoughts on it, we'll go back verse by verse. Those of you who do have the source sheet in front of you, I gave you too many commentaries. We're not going to get to all of them, but I wanted to add anything that I thought was interesting to the topic so that we could both discuss it tonight, but also so that you could read it in your own free time if you would like. So this is the beginning of our Parsha, of Parashat Bo, and it starts, Vayomer, I'm going to hold this close to my face, sorry. Vayomer avdei Pharaoh elav ad matai ihyeh ze lanu lemokesh. So Pharaoh's people, the people who work for Pharaoh, said to him, until when are you going to have this be a hard thing on us? right? Are you going to, the plagues are happening. So how long are you going to let this go on, basically? How long is this hardship going to be happening to us? Shalach et ha'anashim, send away the people. Ve'ya'avdu et Hashem Elohehem. Ha-terem teda ki avda Mitzrayim. So let them go and let them worship their God. Interesting that the word Eved is being used here both for Pharaoh and for the way in which they practice towards God. But let them go and be with their people. Let them go and praise their God, worship their God. Have you not yet come to know that we've lost Egypt? This was what caught my eye, this phrase right here. Right, that Pharaoh's people are basically coming to him. If you're interested in the other ways that I am curious around how Pharaoh's people talk to him, you can listen to the podcast that Rabbi Shapiro and I did this past week. But it's interesting that this really powerful guy is being spoken to by his lowly men, as this is pointing out. Right, it doesn't seem like these are women who are speaking to him, but people who work for and with him, and saying, hey, sir, do you not recognize that the place that you think you're in charge of has completely lost it? You no longer have any control. We've lost what you consider to be Egypt. So listen to how it continues. But that's the reason that one line is the reason that I brought this whole story for us. So Moses and Aaron, this is verse 8, Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, go and worship Adonai your God. Who are the ones to go? All right, go on your way, but tell me who's leaving. I need to know for my own census, so to speak, who's going to be gone and who's going to stay with me. Verse 9, Moses replied, we will all go. This was the second thing that caught my eye. Young and old, sons and daughters, our flocks and herds, for we must observe the Lord's festival. Chag Hashem lanu, Chag Adonai lanu. So, who's going to go? Pharaoh's expecting that Moses is just going to say, oh, the men, of course, because if we need to worship our God, and this is what the commentators say, if we're going to worship our God, then we only need the men to do that. But Moses' answer is much more inclusive than that, and he says, oh, we're all going. As soon as you let us go, we're all out of here. Young, old, men, women, everybody is leaving because we all need to worship God. So this is a really ahead of his time egalitarian statement to say, you might think that this is only important to the men, but in fact, we're all getting out of here because our connection to God is not just for the men, it's for all of us. That might be a little bit of my drosh, but that seems to be what Moshe is saying. Verse 10, but he said to them, Pharaoh said to them, Adonai be with you, the same as I mean to let your children go with you. Clearly you are bent on mischief. Now I'm going to read this in Hebrew because it's not actually what it says in the Hebrew. Vayomer aleichem iyechen Hashem imachem. So God will be with you. Ka'asher ashalach etchem ve'et tapchem. So I will send you and your children. Re'u ki ra'a neged penechem. So it doesn't really say you're bent on mischief, though I guess colloquially that might be what it means. But literally it says that there is evil or badness that is against your face, right? Meaning like in front of you or across from you, right? Neged is something against or across, or you can see it, and penechem is your face. So bent on mischief, like, okay, that's how JPS is understanding it, but it seems to actually be much more personal that this is happening in front of them to their faces. Pharaoh is still talking here. No, it does say men here, Gvarim, you men folk, go and worship Adonai, since that is what you want. So Pharaoh's basically saying, wait a second here, you can't take everybody, you're just going to take the men because that's what you want. And they were expelled from Pharaoh's presence. Moshe and Aaron were expelled from Pharaoh's presence. So in verse 12 then, what happens? Another plague. Adonai said to Moses, hold out your arm over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat up all the grasses in the land, whatever the hail has left. So we don't hear Moses and Aaron say, sorry, that's not good enough for us. We're not going to leave until you let all of us go. But it's very clear that that is what happens because they stay and there's another plague. So though Pharaoh says, sure, the men can leave, Moshe seems to be saying, no, we're not going to go until all of us can go. So that was the third thing that was very interesting to me that I had never focused on before. So before we go on to commentaries, I just want to hear thoughts. Anybody have any thoughts, comments? Maybe you've spent more time looking at these verses than I have in my past. Yes, Alan, go ahead. Just unmute first. I think you should be able to.
There we go.
There.
All right. It's hi, Shabbat Shalom, and Happy New Year. It seems to me, just looking at this, that it's not doing mischief. It's like he wants everyone to go because that's what God commanded him to do, that all the people are supposed to go. And this may be a pretext to Pharaoh to go out just for 3 days, thinking he'll let them go. But when all the children and everyone else is going to go, they're going to leave and not come back because that was what they were commanded to do. That's what Moses was commanded to lead everyone away. So it just seems to me this is just the pretext to put one over on Pharaoh.
Great. So yeah, it's possible that Moshe is not as creatively thinking as we might want to say that he is, but that God told him that everyone has to leave. So when Pharaoh says, no, just the men can go, Moses says, well, that's not what I was told. I have to follow the rules. Everyone needs to leave. And so then more of these plagues are put on Pharaoh until they're all told they can leave. Yes, Tamara, go ahead.
I think that Pharaoh wants to put conditions on things, and I think that's not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, Pharaoh's trying to say, well, I want it to be, you can have 20%, but Moshe's saying, no, I'm not letting this go until you give me 100%. And Moshe's basically saying, well, okay, well, then you're going to continue having these plagues fall upon you because the conditions don't work for us. Great. Other thoughts, comments? Yeah, Tom.
I just think it's interesting that Pharaoh asked, because I mean, if he hadn't said who are the ones to go, it would have ended. The conversation could have ended there. You know, Pharaoh's obviously trying to exert control, and he doesn't mean it when he says go, because he's putting conditions on it. But it's still kind of interesting that he could have not asked.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that he has any interest in it whatsoever, right? That it matters to him who's still there, that maybe I wouldn't go as far as to say he cares about who these people are, who he might be left with, but that he has some kind of relationship with who's around, that knowing who's going to either go or be left with him is for some reason interesting to him. Yeah. Joanna.
Just I'm noticing the parallels in these few verses to the story of Jacob leaving Lavan. And there's also a moment when he does like an ad matai with Lavan. Mm-hmm. And also like there's such emphasis in the Lavan story that Yaakov left not only with his family, but with his flock also. And again, here that echo of the flock. Mm-hmm. And just seeing, sort of the inverse here, and that story is the microcosm for what happens now.
Interesting. It's always so fascinating to put stories, right? I don't think we would ever say that Lavan is like a Pharaoh character, right? So it's always interesting to put those parallels together where we're clearly working with similarities in stories, but not similarities in characters. But you're right that there is some kind of detail-oriented piece to what is leaving, similar to Tom's question of like, why I need to even know that, but what is leaving and the conditions around who is leaving, when are they leaving, are they coming back, all of those pieces. Okay, lots of hands just popped up. Joe, and then Rabbi Sean, and then Alan.
Hi. I think it's also quite interesting. It kind of illustrates how delusional Pharaoh is at this point. It opens with, you've lost Egypt effectively. There's all these plagues going on. The country is the infrastructure, so to speak, is being laid barren and ruined.
Yeah.
That his biggest concern here is our slaves are going to go escape and they're not going to come back.
Right. Yeah, and that was the part to me as well that was so fascinating. That first line, those last 4 or 5 words, whatever it was in the beginning verse, right? That his people, his courtiers, need to be the ones to say to him, "Hello, have you not seen outside? Have you not noticed what is happening? Our Nile is full of blood. We just had a bunch of hail, right? Have you not kind of taken scope as to what's happening around you? How much longer can this possibly go on?" And yet here he is nickel and diming for every person who's going to be still in the land or not. There's no land to really care about anymore. So it's a really fascinating point as to what he's focusing on in this moment here. Okay, Rabbi Sean. Oh, you just muted yourself.
Yes. Hi. I will just build on that last comment and ask the question, whom is he speaking to? He has at least 3 different audiences, potentially separate from each other or together. Mm-hmm. As you just said, right? The Ovdei Pharaoh, the servants of Pharaoh, ironically, as you pointed out, his cabinet, his inner circle, whoever this is.
Yeah.
Second audience, of course, is Moses and Aaron. Or is he just pushing back to God? And I just think that the truth is probably yes. And that he's aware of these multiple audiences or constituencies or, competitors. And he's a pretty stressed out, evil villain. He's demonstrating his confusion, perhaps.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't thought there's confusion in reading this in terms of who's he's speaking to and who's speaking and who's listening, but I hadn't thought about how there's 3 very distinct characters, or as you said, audiences listening or speaking in the case of the Ovdei Pharaoh, and what does that mean about the narrative that he's sharing also? Because if at the end it's to God or maybe just to himself, kind of in a rage, that it's a very different story that he gets into a bit of anger at the end here, whereas at the beginning, which your lovely husband shared with us, he asks, well, who are you people? Who's leaving? So it seems that there is an element of kind of relational understanding at the beginning, and then by the end, when he's back in his own head or talking to God, all of a sudden he recognizes, oh, wait a second, I need to go along with my plan from before, and we need to stick this one out. Very good. Love that. Alan. Wait, you're muted. You might be talking, but you're muted.
Okay. Last week, Joel Grossman gave a drash specifically dealing with the similarities between the Jacob story and the Moses story, particularly when they're first coming out, the meeting at the well, they get married very quickly after they have breaking bread together. Mm-hmm. And Joanna's point about this is coming in terms of farther along in the Jacob story with Laban and coming up here is something that is just mind-blowing, that the motif keeps on appearing to highlight the stories about, and Joel made it the point that they wound up both being leaders of what was going to take place in terms of Jacob's sons being, in Judah, we are Yehudim, we are Jews following that, and it was Moshe who actually saved the Jewish people by leading them out of Mitzrayim. So maybe it's those parallels are there for that particular reason. Could it be coincidence? I don't think so. I think that Joanna's right. There's really a real connection between the stories that could maybe even be explored even further.
Yeah, it was a beautiful drash, and those who didn't hear it should listen to it. I'm sure it's on the podcast somewhere. The elements of parallelism all over the Torah are really fascinating. And as I once learned from my teacher and friend, Rabbi Sean Fieldsmeyer, there's also an economy of language in the Torah. And so the fact that so much of the Torah has themes that are shared, whether in words or in character developments, which you're both speaking to in terms of Jacob, right? As you were sharing that, I was thinking about how Jacob also leads the people in a certain extent out of a place and into another. And Moshe's is a little bit more dramatic, but there is also that bringing a people together to take them and do something great with them, that Jacob and Moshe share. So could it be that those parallels are meant to be noticed? Probably, because we're probably supposed to understand that one person can bring a lot of people together and do wonderful, beautiful things with them in community. Okay, let's look at a few commentaries here. Again, we're not going to look at all of them. It's 2 full pages of commentaries. So I really enjoyed this Ibn Ezra commentary. It's the first one on the page if you're looking at the source sheet. And it says here, he's commenting on the words, and Pharaoh's servants said, right, that the Vayamru, that the Ovdei Paro said to Pharaoh, which is surprising in of its own, case in terms of servants speaking to their master. So Ibn Ezra comments, the meaning of Haterem Teda, let's not use the Shakespearean English here. Let's use the real words. Haterem Teda, have you come to not yet know, right? Do you not yet see or not yet understand? Is, according to Ibn Ezra, do you first want it to become clear to you that Egypt is destroyed? Right? Would you rather just sit around, have all of these plagues happen to you, end up sitting, I'm thinking of like those doomsday movies where like everything is bombed all around them, or, the futuristic movies where something terrible has happened and the earth no longer exists, but there's one guy, usually like Will Smith or someone, like standing in the middle of desolate land and looking around like, well, okay, now what? Right? That is just a fascinating thing for Ibn Ezra to even imagine, that Pharaoh actually wants to see it all the way through. Right? He is not worried, or he doesn't care, one of the two, that the land, that the community could become completely destroyed. He's stubborn. He wants to stick to his guns and make sure that everything goes his way. So though it's only in quotes a commentary, I think this is very possible that Ibn Ezra is tapping into a stubborn Pharaoh, which we know he either is or at times becomes, based on God's intervening of hardening his heart. Okay, Chizkuni then says, they now questioned Pharaoh's judgment by asking him if he wanted to wait until the whole of Egypt was ruined. They implied that if Egypt were to be ruined, in the end, Pharaoh would have no option but to give in to the Israelites' demands. Why not give in while Egypt was still a functioning nation? Again, really interesting, right? Why would you wait until your nation has completely gone away, where you're going to have no control any longer because there's going to be nothing to control, then say yes to something when even in saying yes, you're going to have control over what's left, versus waiting until it's all gone and you too are probably also gone. And then, and we know this actually from the end of our story, Pharaoh looks like a very weak leader by the end, because he basically, after a terrible plague, obviously, but he basically says, okay, that's it. My hands are up. The white flag is being waved, and I'm done here. But that's not a moment of strength. That's a moment of weakness. So what Chizkuni is saying here is, why not be a strong leader and say, I'm going to go up against this while it's still a fight, as opposed to I'm just going to wait until it's all destroyed and then I have to give in. Fascinating. Yeah, Alan, go ahead.
Even at the very end, Pharaoh's stubbornness is there, because even after he lets everyone go, what does he do? He sends the chariots with him at the front to go and get them. It's like that is, even when rationally it wouldn't make sense to do, potentially if he were to listen to his servants who were speaking to him. But in the end, he just ignores everyone and says, I've got to get these Jews. I've got to get this I have to destroy them. I can't let them go.
True, for sure. And I think that the last plague, given what the last plague is, I think shows, and again, understandably, because it's a terrible thing to happen even to our worst enemy, that it is a moment of weakness of, I can't have anything like this happen ever again, so they need to leave. And then it dawns on him, wait a second, what did I just do? Let me go after them. So you are completely correct. It just doesn't seem like hail is really pulling at his heartstrings yet, which makes sense. Though it was fiery hail, so it could have been that it was really, really destructive. Okay. Oh, this is also interesting. The Tur HaAruch, we're skipping Rabbeinu Bachia for a second. The Tur HaAruch says that he's commenting on in the verse. It says here. I'm just going to read it inside so you can hear what it says. Give me 1 second. Oh, it's bringing two verses together because this actually isn't here in this one verse. Okay. Well, what the Torah Aruch is commenting on. Okay. What the Torah Aruch is commenting on is that this word vayetze is being brought in here, which means to go out, right? Moshe and Aaron leave Pharaoh's presence. So it's bringing in two verses in the same. Sorry about that. They waited until Moses had left, as they did not want to challenge their king in Moses' presence. And they did not want to give Moses the satisfaction to know that they were afraid of him. So this is real world leadership, right? And real world work, right? When you are working in any kind of power dynamic, whether it is in a business or in a classroom or in your own family, right? Your partner, for example, might not choose to argue with you in front of your children because you want to seem like a united front in front of your children. In a classroom, the principal should not come in and say something to you in front of your class that might be embarrassing to you, because in that situation, you are the leader of your classroom, right? You're the person in charge of the students in front of you. And so what the Torah Aruch is saying here is that Moses and Aaron were told to go, or at least left the presence of Pharaoh, and only then did the courtiers say to Pharaoh, you've really got this all wrong. So even though we don't necessarily have so much respect for Pharaoh and his leadership, it does seem as though his Ovdei Paro, his servants, were interested in giving him advice, but not interested in throwing him under the bus. And I find that quite remarkable, that even if their idea was a good one and it might have helped them get what they wanted, to say it in front of Moses, they still waited to be respectful to their leader. Okay, so Rambam, we're now moving to the part of Ramban, Nachmanides says on verse 8, where we're talking about who is going to leave. Pharaoh desired that their leaders, elders, and officers should go, men that are pointed out by name. So Pharaoh, really wanted the men to be able to be the ones to leave, which we kind of infer from how he talks about why they're leaving. Moses answers him that also the sons and daughters will go, for we must hold a feast unto God, and it is mandatory upon us all to take part in the feast. So what Nachmanides is pointing out here is, well, if we're giving you the reason for why we need to leave, then I actually need all the men and the women, because it's their mitzvah too. We don't just celebrate holidays, just us. We celebrate holidays with our daughters and our wives and our female slaves, right? All of these people who you aren't taking into account, who need to leave to be servants of God, they too are servants of God, maybe in a different way than you understand, but they too need to celebrate this festival. Pharaoh's anger was then kindled on account of the sons and daughters, and he said that under no circumstances will he send the little ones, for they take no part in the offerings. Instead, he would send all the adult males because of the feast which Moses mentioned, while the little ones and the women will remain in Egypt. This is scarily parallel to different parts of Jewish history where we have been persecuted and sent out of places, right? The Holocaust obviously is a very big one to use as an example here, that the person in charge of getting rid of or enslaving or whatever's happening at that moment in history, our people, seems to think that they know what we need, right? Seems to know that, in order for, right, Pharaoh seems to think that the kids can stay because they don't take part in the offerings. Well, when was the last time that Pharaoh gave a sacrifice to our God? Right, never. So what does he know of our practices? Nothing. But in order for a leader to take control, they have to at least convince themselves that they know what we are doing and what will be hardest for us to carry. So what Nachmanides is making up, though I don't mean that in like a fantastical way, but as a way of explanation, what Nachmanides is saying here is that Pharaoh was convinced that the men were the only ones who needed to do what Moses and Aaron had said they were leaving to do, and therefore, well, no, then the women and children have to stay. And what we all know that Pharaoh seems to not remember is that if the children and the women stay, he really doesn't have anybody doing his work for him. So it's also interesting that he does want to keep somebody, probably similar to like keeping collateral, right? If we're going to talk about people that way, he wants to keep somebody around, but he's not keeping the people around who are actually going to be most useful to him in terms of building, potentially useful to him in other really terrible ways, but not in terms of the cities that he was building with these servants. Any questions or comments? Now we've done a few commentaries since people spoke, so I just want to pause for a second. No? Okay. All right, we're just going to do, I think, 2 more, and then we'll do a quick Mariv. Just trying to decide which ones. Hold on. Okay. All right. So let's the Chizkuni here. The Chizkuni here is pretty interesting. Actually, we might just do this one because the other ones are pretty similar to what we just read. The last one, by the way, is fully Hasidic text, and we're not going to do it just because it would take too long to read it, explain it, comment on it. But it's an interesting text, and it does bring in parallels to the Jacob story by way of Esau. So if you're interested in that, please take a look. So Chizkuni is then talking about this moment of dismissing them, of dismissing Moshe and Aaron. And Chizkuni goes into saying that it actually means that he expelled them, which, okay, maybe. But interesting that somehow that's different than dismissing, right? Expel, you would assume they're not going to come back. We all know that they obviously do. The reason that Pharaoh had not expelled Moses and Aaron up until now, before they had been recalled, when they were not even allowed to leave before having been given express permission to do so, was because they knew that God would not bring on the same plague a second time. Pharaoh considered locusts as a repeat of the hail, as both plagues ruined the food supply from the earth. It's just a fact. I would love to be able to interview some of these commentators, because I just think that sometimes what they comment, like how they came up with this, I have absolutely no idea. But it is interesting that maybe it had to do with the type of plague. Maybe it had to do with the destruction that had been done to the country, to the land, that made Pharaoh feel one way or the other about the people, but also about when they were going to be able to leave. And so what Chizkuni is saying here is that there's no way that this plague that's kind of already done the same thing twice was going to happen again. And so who knows what the next one's going to be. It might not be as bad, but it also might not be as destructive as A, his courtiers seem to think, and B, they've seen now in the land. Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, sort of going along that line, I don't remember if this is the 6th or the 7th plague, but basically they've been through quite a few and they're still standing. So I'm wondering here if really Pharaoh is not just making this accommodation for his servants or his people to say, okay, I'll try something, but he doesn't really mean it at all. It's really just done. He's saying, okay, I'll let a few of you go because my servants are bugging me, and I'll make the people at home, it will seem like I'm doing something about this plague, but actually he's not, because because he's seen all along 6 or 7 plagues in, and they're still okay. He's surviving.
Interesting. So you're saying that the reason that he was okay letting some go is because by unloading a little bit of the burden, that people might see, oh, he is being helpful to us, and not think of it as so bad. And so then maybe the plagues would either not be as bad moving forward or would be lifted. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that it's more of a political move rather than trying to find a real solution.
Interesting.
Yeah, there are parallels to politics these days as well, right?
Sure. Like giving a little, but not giving the whole thing. So you can say, oh, but I did a little bit. And so that's helpful, like the opposite of if you give a mouse a cookie. That's right. Very interesting. I hadn't thought about the men, women, and children piece in that way, but that's a fascinating way of looking at it. Okay, so just before we go into Mariv, I started off by saying I didn't necessarily have like a lesson for us to take away from this. I think it was just really an experience in terms of looking at Torah, which I've looked at this parsha many, many times in my life, but to be able to look at Torah and see certain things kind of pop out at you that are interesting based on whether there is something in my life that subconsciously made me look at this, I have no idea. Or if it's just interesting to see this piece of Torah read in the first week of 2022, and how we think about those who give us ideas, those who we listen to, those who we don't listen to, how Moshe describes and is willing to really fall on the sword for all of his people, not just going to leave some behind, but I'm going to take everybody with me. Right, we're seeing 3 major elements in this very small vignette. I'm not sure if you can call it that, but Tom can tell me later. And this really small story, right, that we see different characters holding on to things that they find very true. And I think we all just need to be more aware of that in our own lives. Who we listen to, how we listen, how we lead, and how we consider those around us to be the people who we're going to always keep together and not let anybody go by the wayside. So I hope that was good insight and interested into a part of our Torah that I'm sure we've all just glossed over before, and hope that you can sit with that throughout the week and enjoy any insights that come to you on it. We are going to move. Baruch Tiyeh. Thank you. We're going to move to Mariv, which can be found on page 264 or page 281 or page 200. And just as a reminder, I'll do the first line, but not the Baruch Hu, and then I will do the blessing that follows the Baruch Hu. Vehu rachum yechaper avam velo yashchit vehirba lashiva po velo yarkoch hamato Adonai Hoshia hamelech yanenu v'yom korenu Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Hashem yivrom. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה מבדיל בין יום ובין לילה אדוני צבאות שמו אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני המעריב הרבים אהבת עולם בית ישראל ואהבתך תסיר ממנו לעולמים ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל אל מלך נאמן שמע ישראל Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Adonai lechem emet v'menachas l'kayam alekinu Adonai Eloheinu. ומלכותו ורצון קיבלו עליהם משה בני ישראל לך ענו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם מי כמוך בעלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות אוסף פלא מלכותך ראו בניך בוקע ים לפני משה זה אלי ענו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו ביד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל השכיבנו אדוני ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ושלום יתהווה עד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני שומר עמו ישראל לעד ברוך אדוני לעולם אמן ואמן ברוך אדוני מציון שכן ירושלים הללויה ברוך אדוני כי המלכות שלך היא ולעמליה תמלוך בכבוד כי אין לנו מלך אלא אתה ברוך אתה אדוני המלך בכבודו תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ועל כל מעשיו. The Whispered Amida can be found on page 270, page 286, or page 210. If you have not yet finished your Amida, please continue at your own pace. We're going to pick up at the end of the Chatzi Kaddish. So in my Siddur, that's on page 279, and it'll be around page 292 or page 682 in the other Siddurim. Vihi noam Adonai Eloheinu aleinu ma'aseh yadeinu konana aleinu ma'aseh yadeinu konanehu yoshev b'tzad elyon b'tzad shaddai tzalama. Yikraeni v'neu imanachi v'tzarach alatzeu v'chabadeu orchem im aspieu v'rei v'shuhati orchem im aspiehu v'arehu b'shuhati. Aleinu can be found on page 281, 297, or page 696. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol l'ateit gedula leotzer b'reishit שלא עשנו כגוי הארצות ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה שלא שם חלקנו כהם וגור עלינו ככל המונם ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נוטה שמיים ויסר עצמו. Kakatu betoratecha Adonai himlach le'olam va'ed v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai le'melech ala kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Rachel, would you be willing to unmute and lead us in Kaddish? Before we do Kaddish Yatom, some of you heard me say this earlier this morning. Not a member of our community, but just a member of the general LA community. Rowan Salem passed away this week. She is the sister-in-law of a member in our community, Linda Salem. And I just can't help but think about the way in which the world became a little less artistic and a little less bright this past week with her passing. I shared this morning, but I'll share again, that she was an artist in really everything she did. The way that she spoke, the things she created, the way that she dressed, the way that her kids are and were in the world growing up. And she taught art to all ages. The first time I had her as a teacher, I was 1.5, and my grandmother took an art class with her and me. And who knew from art at 1.5? But she really brought art into the world in just the most magical of ways. She most recently, before retirement, was teaching AP art at Shelhevet and was just allowing students to find their art voice in really powerful ways. One thing that I'll just share personally is I'm not a good visual artist, and for some reason when I was a camper at Ramah, I was put in the art chug, and it really was more of a joke than anything. I couldn't believe that anybody wanted me in that chug, and she taught me how to paint a Chagall painting, and it's still up in my childhood bedroom. It's the only thing I've ever painted in my life that wasn't, like paint by numbers. And really just a beautiful soul that has been suffering for a while, and we will all miss her terribly, and I wanted to share a piece of that before we said the Mourner's Kaddish, because whether or not you knew her, she's someone to be thought of and remembered. So Rachel, if you will unmute, please, and lead us. Mourner's Kaddish can be found on page 282, 298, or page 698.
Yikadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'amad divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael v'agala uvizman kariv v'imru Amen.
Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam lomei almaya.
Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lomei almaya. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקדושה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בימה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Yasher Koach. And now we will do Havdalah. Right on time, so sorry, no random singing this week. Yanai nanai nai 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 yanai nanai nai yanai yanai nanai nai 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 yanai nanai nai yanai nai nai yanai yanai nai nai yanai yanai nai oh yanai yanai nai nai yanai yanai nai הנה ישועתי, אפתח ולא אפחד, כי עוזי וזמרת יד אדוני ויהי לי לישועה, ושבתם מים בששון ממעייני הישועה, לאדוני הישועה. על עמך ברכתך סלע, אדוני צבאות עמנו. משגב לנו אלוהי יעקב סלע, אדוני צבאות, אשרי אדם בוטח בך, אדוני הושיע. המלך יעננו ויום קוראנו ליהודים. הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר, כן תהיה לנו כוס ישועות תשא, ובשם אדוני אקרא. יין עיני ינעי נעי נעי, יין עיני ינעי נעי נעי. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מיני ושמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מאורי האש. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, המבדיל בין קודש לחול, בין אור לחושך, בין ישראל לעמים, בין יום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה. ברוך אתה אדוני המבדיל בין קודש לחול. המבדיל בין קודש לחול, חטאותינו ימחול. זרענו וכספנו ירבה הרבה כחול, וככוכבים הלילה. זרענו וכספנו ירבה הרבה כחול, ככוכבים הלילה. שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב. שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, אליהו הנביא, אליהו התשבי, אליהו, אליהו, אליהו הגלעדי, במהרה בימינו יבוא אלינו, עם משיח בן דוד, עם משיח בן דוד. Shavua Tov, Shana Tova. Tomorrow morning, Minyan is only on Zoom, and it is at 8 a.m. Monday morning, it is Rosh Chodesh, so it is at 7:15, not 7:30, both in person and on Zoom. And hope to see you around. Have a great rest of your first day of 2022, and Shavua Tov. That's all I got.
So thank you.
Shavua Tov. Thank you from the East Coast for allowing me to say Kaddish tonight.
Of course. Oh, who are you saying Kaddish for?
My mom.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Had I known, I would have asked you to lead us.
Oh, thank you.
But
Rabbi,
thank you.
would
Yes.
the woman who just died, may her memory be for blessing, would you say her name more slowly?
Yes, Rowan Salem. Roen Salem. All right. See you all soon. I keep on wanting to say Shana Tova. Shavua Tov.